This is a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive.
Welcome to another Ice Guys team season preview video. 32 teams in 32 days rolls along. Ian Cameron and Alex B. Smith with you. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Darth Vader of the NHL. Da, 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 da. The evil empire, in many people's eyes, in the NHL. The Florida Panthers. Unless you're in Fort Lauderdale in the Miami region, you're probably fucking sick and tired of this team by now. But they aren't going anywhere. If off-season activity is any indication for the two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, last year, obviously, when you look at it, the second consecutive season they win the Stanley Cup, even though we saw clearly from Paul Maurice and the Florida Panthers, coasting down the stretch, not exactly all that enthused about winning their own division. In fact, they finished behind Toronto and Tampa Bay in the Atlantic Division last year with 98 points, but for third place in the division. They didn't even have home ice advantage, in the first round of the playoffs against Tampa Bay. And, of course, no home ice advantage in any of their series throughout the postseason run until they got obvious, or not even in the Stanley Cup final. But when you look at it from a Florida standpoint, who cares, right? All it was about was getting into the playoffs, and they did that, and they played their best hockey April and beyond, just like they did the year before. When you look at this Florida Panthers team, they were actually a slight over team when you look at their totals record last year. Obviously, both ends of the ice, just incredibly consistent. There was not really one thing they couldn't do well. I mean, when you end the season like the Florida Panthers, by the way, their playoff statistics, number one in goals for, number one in goals against. Big reason why you're lifting the Stanley Cup once again, which is interesting because when you look at their regular season offensive numbers, they were behind a handful of teams in the NHL, middle of the pack. But defensively, still, the Florida Panthers, the numbers very strong. Of course, once again, last year, 2.72 goals per game allowed. But again, this team, at times in the regular season, they wobbled a bit. We saw down the stretch, it was kind of there'd be several games where we saw the likes of Barkov and Bennett and Tkachuk and Verhaeghe kind of rested, a little load management coming into the NHL. But it didn't affect them in the playoffs. They ramped it up, and they certainly played their best in the postseason. They ripped through Tampa Bay. Now, the big scare, believe it or not, was Toronto last year. The Leafs gave the Panthers their biggest scare. In fact, Leafs were up 2-0 in that series, as we know, and then up 3-1 in Game 3. Like, we're talking about up 2-0 in the series and up 3-1 in Game 3 with a chance to go up 3-0 and probably put that series away. But as resilient as ever, Florida comes back, wins Game 3, and it felt like the pendulum really started to shift in that Toronto series from that moment on. They ended up winning the series, obviously, the Florida Panthers in 7 games with just decisive wins in Game 5 and 7. And then we saw them really bolstered, I think, by that scare against the Leafs, because they played a great series against Carolina, and then obviously they really dominated the Edmonton Oilers at times, but it seemed like as that series went along, Florida was getting stronger. Florida was starting to dictate terms, and Edmonton really didn't have any answers. When you look at this year's Florida Panthers team, well, this has got to be one of the most remarkable, spectacular, amazing offseason performances by a general manager we've seen, given how difficult we thought it was going to be for the Florida Panthers, to re-sign everyone that was an unrestricted free agent going into this season. And we're talking about 3 of the, better players on this team, more impactful players on this team, Aaron Ekblad, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand. There was not very much chance that I thought we were going to see the Panthers and Bill Zito, the GM, be able to keep all 3 of these guys, and he somehow did. Unbelievable work.
And long term.
And long term as well. It's not just, well, we got them on a short 1 or 2 year bridge type of deal. No, you lock these suckers up long term. And that was absolutely spectacular GM work by Bill Zito. I thought they had a good chance to keep 2 or 3. I thought, if you asked me personally after the Stanley Cup win, I thought they were going to keep Ekblad. and I thought they were going to keep Bennett. Bennett's the one it seemed like everybody figured and everybody knew he was going to stay. I thought I was pretty confident in Ekblad, even though it was starting to seem like maybe it could go the other way with him. It was Brad Marchand. He was the one, that people thought, well, you know what? He might chase more money elsewhere and not return to the Florida Panthers. But sure enough, he just fell in love with the team situation, the winning environment, the winning culture. I think the fact that he formed immediate chemistry, and we'll get to that when we break down this year's team, immediate chemistry with Anton Lundell and Eetu Kulmint-Luostarinen on that third line, which was just arguably their best line throughout the Stanley Cup playoff run. I think that also influenced Brad Marchand's decision to stay in Florida. And again, they're all back. This is, once again, pretty much the entire band, for the most part, back together again. Carter Verhaeghe, Alexander Barkov, Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, Evan Rodriguez, Brad Marchand. Now, the big news off-season as far as injuries are concerned, or absences, is Matthew Tkachuk. Matthew Tkachuk, it's reported he had to undergo surgery. We knew he was not 100% all the way through the Stanley Cup playoff run, and this goes back to the regular season when he got that injury. And he gutted through it. We all know it in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but he felt he had to get this surgery done, and better to get it done sooner rather than later, so I could come back as quickly as possible during the regular season. And it looks like January is going to be the target for a Matthew Tkachuk return to the Florida Panthers. So they will miss him, there's no doubt, but this is not a backbreaker by any stretch of the imagination. And this is not me saying Matthew Tkachuk's going to not play as well, and it doesn't matter. It's because they've got so much depth up front, and they can, I think, withstand that for a period of time, at least a few months. And, get him healthy, get him back for the second half of the season. If he comes back second half of the season, he's going to have ample time to get up to game speed, get games under his belt, get back into rhythm, and be ready for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Because when you look at, obviously, the lineup in the Lundell and Luostarinen, we know the big guns, right? Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhart, Bennett. We talk about all those guys. But Brad Marchand, Luostarinen, and Lundell, there's no way you can't say that's not the best third line in the NHL right now, or one of them. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous that is a third line. And what if, AJ Greer and Tomas Nosek have shown they're a good fourth line? Mackie Samoskevich, they love this guy's offensive skill set. He can barely crack the lineup because of this forward group that they have constructed and how deep it is. Now, the good news is for Mackie is because of Tkachuk's injury, this is probably going to open up a spot for him, on the wing to be in the lineup to begin the season. And obviously, this is a guy that's got the capability to score goals for the Florida Panthers as well. Hell, he got 15 goals last year for them. And again, played in a depth role for the Panthers. And it's funny because you look at Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhart, Rodriguez, Bennett, Marchand, Luostarinen, Lundell, Samoskevich, Greer, Nosek, Gadjevich as your forwards in your 12, even without Matthew Tkachuk. And look who's going to be battling for spots. These are established NHLers. Noah Gregor, Luke Kunin is going to be battling for a roster spot. Jesper Boquist, the Swiss Army knife, you could just throw him into the lineup and he can play well for you and maybe even score a goal for you and make an impact offensively. How many times do we see that in the Stanley Cup playoffs? Paul Maurice puts Jesper Boquist into the lineup and bam, immediate impact for this Panthers team. So it's beyond ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous what the Florida Panthers have up front with the forward group. And this is without Tkachuk. Normally, there's teams that are saying, oh, my gosh, we're fucked. What are we going to do without Matthew Tkachuk? Florida doesn't have to worry about that because he's going to be back late in the year, and they have ample forward depth to withstand the absence of a Matthew Tkachuk here for the first few months of the season. And then the blue line. We're gushing about the forward group, and going on and on about how good it is. It's hard not to do that with the blue line as well. Aaron Ekblad back under contract, back with the Panthers, to reunite with Gustav Forsling, to one of the premier top pairings on the blue line in the NHL. Nico Mikkola, I was supremely impressed. I would say mildly surprised, but I really shouldn't be, of how well Seth Jones played for Florida. And I think part of that is, Chicago situation, tough team that's rebuilding, tough environment, losing the way they were, and change of scenery. You get to this winning environment here, and it just stimulates you a little bit. And plus, too, with Florida, he didn't have to play the minutes that he did in Chicago. He was able to be supported by, an outstanding blue line partner in Nico Mikkola, and I think that really helped him just thrive, with the Florida Panthers. So there's, again, you talk about a team that's not making many errors or missteps these days. They trade for Seth Jones. And at the time, we're thinking, wow, what are they going to get out of him? It's been a tough year for him in Chicago. Well, he was absolutely terrific down the stretch of the regular season and then the playoffs for the Florida Panthers. Kulikov, obviously. Jeff Petrie is now with this Florida Panthers team. Obviously, the one new face on this blue line. And Jeff Petrie, look, best days are behind him. He's not exactly got the skating speed he once did, but you're going to put him, he's a veteran guy. He's been around the block. He's played a lot of games in the NHL, and he's going to be your sixth defenseman, and not play, the ton of minutes that you're obviously going to see Forsling and Ekblad and Mikkola and others play. So I don't mind it, bringing him in on board, and it's only $775,000 on a one-year deal for Jeff Petrie either. So that's not bad. Plus, it's not even a total given he's going to play every night. Like, you've got Uvis Balinskis, the Latvian defenseman who played a lot of games last year for Florida. You got Tobias Bjornfoot. You got Ben Harper. You got a couple options with guys that have played a decent amount of games in the NHL to also go with. So, like I said, lots of depth there on the blue line as well. Sergei Bobrovsky, goalie Bob. How many elite years do we have left of Bobrovsky's a question, but obviously still, we've not seen much of no decline really from Sergei Bobrovsky. And obviously had another great playoff. It started out slow for him, Tampa series, the beginning of the Toronto series, but then he got it going and was great, really, especially conference finals against Carolina and the Stanley Cup final against Edmonton. I'm intrigued to see Daniil Tarasov now as the backup goaltender. The numbers weren't great in Columbus. You have to remember it's a much weaker blue line playing in front of him there in Columbus. 3.55 goals against, .880 save percentage for him in 20 games last year for the Blue Jackets. I think this is a good situation. Bob has had a good influence on a lot of the backups that have played there. Look at Stolarz, for example, how he worked in a great tandem with Bobrovsky, and then Anthony Stolarz went to Toronto and obviously had a terrific season with the Leafs last year. I think Sergei Bobrovsky will have a positive influence on Daniil Tarasov here as well for the Florida Panthers. I think it's a good fit for this team. I think it's good for Daniil at this stage of his career because he's going to be obviously insulated by a team that's among the best defensive team. I think the best and deepest blue line in the NHL. And plus, you've got that fellow countryman now coming on board for Bobrovsky. So, that's always nice in a comforting situation. You got guys that can speak the Russian language as well. And it's just it's a good, comforting, stable situation for a guy like Tarasov that I think at this stage is looking for something stable and looking for something to kind of jumpstart his career in a greater positive direction. And I think this will help him for sure. Being on a great team like this, an excellent defensive team, future Hall of Fame, multiple Stanley Cup champion goalie, and Sergei Bobrovsky, a fellow Russian. I think it's a great, great situation for Tarasov. So what I would say is those numbers he's had at Columbus, put him in the garbage can. I don't think they matter as far as his play here with the Florida Panthers. At least not. I'm willing to chuck him away and give him a chance here with Florida. Maybe it's going to be another struggle, but let's not forget he's got just such a better team in front of him here. It wouldn't surprise me to see him thrive in a backup role here for Florida. So, look, I like Florida a lot. There's a reason why they're at the top of the favorite board to win the Stanley Cup again. They're loaded again. They don't look like, based on quotes that I've read, that they've lost their hunger or their desire. Sometimes you get a little complacent, right? When you've gone back-to-back years and won the Stanley Cup, sometimes you get complacent. You're just, we've won two now. We just don't have that burning desire to keep it going. I think they do. They're already talking three-peat. Sergei Bobrovsky, like the day after the parade or something, or after the night they won the Cup, he's in the press conference room, and he's already talking about getting ready for next year, and being in the weight room already, getting ready for next year. If that's not an indication this team is chomping at the bit, looking to make it a three-peat, then I don't know what is. So, normally we think at this stage you run out of gas, you run out of steam, physically you're worn down. It's impossible to win 3 in a row. It's impossible to get back to a Stanley Cup final. It would actually be their 4th year in a row of getting to the Stanley Cup final if they are able to do so. And maybe at some point, physically, and with the number of games they've played, they hit the wall. But I don't know if that's the case because they just balance their 4 lines. They roll all 4 lines, and they balance out the ice time. That it may not be that usual, massive amount of concern that, hey, this team is just going to run out of gas. That may not just happen. That may not happen for this Florida Panthers team. So, like I said, very much, in my opinion, they could pull this off because unless the just the wear and tear and the physicality and the immense amount of hockey they've played in the last 3 years finally catches up to them, unless that happens, the only thing I can say is good luck beating this team because most teams are going to need it. Alex, what do you think here for the Florida Panthers?
Yeah, you look at this continued growth and development for the Florida Panthers. They just continue to plug and play pieces. Like you said, you look at this lineup, even without Matthew Tkachuk, they still look like a complete 4-line squad, complete, 6, 7, 8 defense team. It's funny, there was comments early in the offseason about how some teams had 8, 9 players worth of the depth on defense. And I'm like, that's not true. I'm like, the only team that could even remotely make that claim would be the Florida Panthers. And that's the thing. They're in a spot where they're able to keep so many core pieces, keep pieces they added last year, and still have guys left in the tank. I'm interested to see a guy who I can't imagine he'll get any time with the Florida Panthers this year, but I'm interested to see what happens with Cooper Black in Charlotte. And the reason I'm interested to see what that is because of the fact that you mentioned it's been a lot of wear and tear on Sergei Bobrovsky. He's at the end of his contract. Remember, that was the first $10 million goalie. We talked so much shit about that contract the first 3 years, and he's lived up to it in the last 4. But here he is, or at least the last 3, I should say. But here he is in that 7th and final year. And Daniil Tarasov, as you mentioned, whether he fits in and whether he can get comfortable with this team and have better numbers in front of a better team in front of him. But this is a 1-year deal for him as well. So there's a lot of parts that could move down the line. But right now, at this current moment, this is still the best team in hockey. And, you look at the schedule, 25 of their first 41 games are at home. So the bulk of the games that they'll be playing without Matthew Tkachuk, they're at home games, and they're going to be favored, and they're going to have things on their side. And the fact that they don't really have any long-term travel outside of early in the season, you got a 5-game road trip. You go out west for 4, but they don't really have any significant travel until after the new year. And like I said, at that point, they should have Tkachuk back. I'm sure they're probably eyeing that January 2nd game, the outdoor game, if you will, playing at Sunrise, Florida, when the New York Rangers. That'll probably be the time we could see Tkachuk coming back. I'm sure they'll be wanting to get him ready for that. But this team, all they got to do is really just coast through, not suffer too many significant injuries, and they should be right there in the running, being at the top of the East. And once they get into the playoffs, we know they have everything it takes: goaltending, depth, coaching, to get right back to where they've been the last 2 years as Stanley Cup champions and the last 3 years of getting into the Stanley Cup final. Like you said, the fact that they seem hungry to be a team to win 3 in a row, something we haven't seen since the 80s, something in our lifetime we have literally never seen. They want to accomplish that. So they're not finished, and good on them. Good on them for that. I'm not ready to call them the evil empire or kind of start just booing this team because they've won back-to-back cups. This is fantastic. This is a franchise that looked dead in the water. We kept talking about how this team should have been moved out of Florida a decade ago, and here they are on a dynasty run. I think it's tremendous. This is what Gary Bettman has always dreamed of, with putting all these teams in these random southern and western states and cities. So, it's a good thing for the league, and if anybody wants to stop them, go right ahead. There's 31 teams gunning for what they've been able to do the last 2 years. Go ahead and stop them if you can.
No doubt. I still remember seeing that building, Amarant Bank Arena. Of course, it was many other names back in the day. It's been changed. That the name change in that arena has happened multiple times, but half empty. Half empty building. Empty seats everywhere. Even just 7-8 years ago, that's the way it was. And now to see it go from what it was at that time to now. Place is packed every night. Place is raucous, and it's just rocking during the Stanley Cup playoff run. Yeah, it's just remarkable how far it's coming. It's you're seeing people play, kids are starting to play hockey even more. Like they're already starting to see some Florida kids get into playing hockey, but now even more so I find the last few years with the Panthers having this great run. It's just the interest and getting the youth involved in playing the sport. It's gone up as well. So it's been remarkable to see it. Now I will say one thing, obviously, it's a question of value with the futures. What I will say is, and this is something to keep an eye on, regular season betting for the Florida Panthers. I don't think this team is going to be a team I'm going to rush to bet on every single night. For the Florida Panthers, This is going to be and we saw it last year down the stretch. They couldn't give two shits about the Atlantic Division Championship last year. They couldn't. They were just, let's keep everybody healthy. We were battling some injuries. Let's give some guys a couple games rest here down the stretch. And they did not actively go balls to the wall to chase down Toronto for first in that Atlantic Division. And I could see Paul Maurice taking a similar approach this year. It's just solidify your playoff spot. Okay, if it's winning the division, great. But even if it's second in the Atlantic, if it's third in the Atlantic, I don't even think they'd panic if they finished in a wild card spot. I'm not saying they're going to finish in a wild card spot, but I don't think they'd be like, oh boy, we finished in a wild card spot. Now we're in trouble. No, not this team. Their mindset's going to be, hey, we just solidify our playoff spot, get in, keep guys fresh and rested down the stretch, go maybe the load management route a little bit like they did last year down the stretch. And then we just flip that switch in April and ramp it up in the playoffs at playoff time, which we know they're very capable of. So what I would say is be cautious about betting on them a ton during the regular season, because there's going to be off nights. There's going to be nights where they don't bring it. They have a clunker. And there's going to be probably stretches during the season, Alex, even like last year during the regular season, where they go on a skid and it's like, what's wrong with the Florida Panthers? There's a very good chance that when they do go through those skids and those losing streaks in the regular season, nothing could be wrong with them. This could just be a long ebb and flow season with a long-term goal in mind. And don't worry about them come April. If they get in the playoffs, they'll be just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually didn't mention this in the Chicago video, but I am on the Blackhawks fading Florida on opening night. I think with that early start time, you got Spencer Knight going up against his old team for his first time as well. There's a lot of factors here where I like Chicago in that spot, and I don't really like Florida in that home spot. We look to fade the champs, and I get they won last year in this spot, but that was against Boston, their rival. That was a game where they dominated early and actually kind of let Boston back in that game, ended up winning it 6-4.
Remember, Swayman was still holding out. Corpusalo started that game, and they let him up. Yeah,
and that's right. So completely different scenario. I could see where here maybe they'd be, okay, we're doing the ceremony again. There may be a little bit of complacency. I could see Knight being ready, and he didn't. He had one ring with this team, but now being on the opposite side of that, and of course we know the talent that the Hawks have. Those young guys, they want to get to a point where, hey, we have a banner ceremony in our barn one day. Let's beat the champs. So at plus 260, plus 280, shop around. I definitely will be fading Florida in game one.
There you go, right there. How about that? Right here on this Florida preview. There's an opening night bet there for Alex with Chicago with the big underdog price against Florida there on the first game of the NHL season. And like I said, there's going to be spots to fade Florida this year in the regular season. But again, any struggles during the regular season should not elicit immediate panic about their potential in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's the most important thing that I'm hitting home to everybody. Because even at times last year, I'm thinking when Florida was going through those pitfalls and those losing streaks, oh my goodness, is this going to be the same team in the playoffs? And voila, look what happened.
If you want a time to bet Florida East, Florida Cup futures, maybe even Florida Division,
now's not the time. Wait for a little dip from Florida and then take that price on them. Yeah.
I think this is going to be the perfect window, though. I'm looking at the schedule. I mentioned the January 2nd outdoor game against the Rangers. After that, they have a home game against Colorado. And then 9 of the next 10 games are on the road. They have a 6-game road trip. They come home for one random game against San Jose, and then they go back on the road against Winnipeg, Minnesota, and Chicago. That might be the stretch of time where we could see them lose a few games, and that'll probably be maybe the lowest point. At the latest point of the season, the lowest prices you'll be able to get were the Florida Panthers.
I like it. It makes a lot of sense. No question about that. Like I said, I just think from a future state, you can bet them now. There's no harm in that. I'm just saying, I think there's a chance that we're going to see at some point this year, even though I'm singing the praises of how good this team could be without Tkachuk, you're still going to miss him. And there's going to be times when they will miss him, and they're going to go through a 2-8 or maybe a 2-6, 2-7 slide. They might at some point. It's very possible, especially knowing, that they've got the long-term goal in mind. And once they go through that little rough patch, you're going to see at least a slight adjustment in the futures odds and in the Eastern Conference futures odds, the Stanley Cup futures odds on Florida. And that's when you may want to consider pouncing on taking the Florida Panthers from a future standpoint. Great stuff talking about the Florida Panthers. We hope you're enjoying these season preview videos. Before we wrap up, we will hear from our brand new smoke sponsor of the Ice Guys show, our friends at Royal Cannabis.
Royal Cannabis, where the kings and queens shop.
Check them out. Promo code IceGuys, 20% off RoyalCannabisShop.com. This has been your Florida Panthers season preview video. For Alex B. Smith, I'm Ian Cameron. We hope you're enjoying these videos. 32 teams in 32 days rolls along courtesy of the Ice Guys.